Hi, I'm Donna Ray.
And I'm Al Wadley.
Welcome to our podcast, Feldenkrais for Life.
In each episode, we will discuss ideas and experiences pertaining to the Feldenkrais method.
You're going to learn skills that will move pain to comfort, anxiety to ease, and we'll explore learning and how to spark creativity.
To learn more about Donna, visit her site at donnaray.com.
To find Al Wadley, go to achievingexcellence.com. Good morning, Al.
Good morning, Donna. How you doing?
I'm well, thanks. It's good to see you. It's been a while.
It's been a while. It's always good to see you.
Thank you.
We have a very interesting topic we're going to talk about today, and that is memory and memory integration and the types of memory that we form in our development and into our adulthood. It's a really, really fascinating topic.
It's a fascinating topic, and there's a lot of controversy about it in the minds of people that we come in contact with, and even among neuroscientists. There are differences of opinions. But let's just go with what comes up today and see where this topic takes us.
Okay, well, you've piqued my interest. So maybe later you can share some of these conflicting perceptions about memory and the conflict around that.
Yeah, and maybe it's just the way people talk about it sounds conflicted.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can tell you one, and this is maybe a layperson's understanding of memory, but it comes up all the time in my training programs and even in my private practice. So sometimes people believe memory is located in body parts, and that's completely not true.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not even sure where they're getting that idea anymore, but I think there are some approaches that promote it.
There are definitely.
Yeah. So you don't have a memory in your shoulder or your knee or your pelvis for that matter. Memories are in the brain, the nervous system. And I would say it's more like free association. So maybe if somebody touches your shoulder, you remember that you had a shoulder injury, but it's through the association of the touch that your mind then recalls the shoulder injury. There's nothing in your shoulder that reflects that incident.
Yeah. So a touch or a movement or something can trigger a memory, but the memory's in the brain. So that impulse goes up through the tactile or proprioceptive sensation and up into the brain, where it triggers memory, which can be recalled and come to the foreground. It's not in the cells. It's not in the muscles.
Right.
It's a brain process.
Yes, and the brain tends to categorize memories. So let's just stay with the topic of shoulder for a moment. So when you think shoulder, you may recall shoulder injuries, or you may have a sensation of the shoulder, including part of the chest, the upper back, the shoulder blade, the shoulder joint. It's kind of an amorphous location, in fact, the shoulder. But people have an image of what the shoulder means to them. And then in that category, they may recall, hitting a tennis ball because it requires movement of the shoulder, or playing racquetball. I played a lot of racquetball when I was in my 20s. Now pickleball. So the shoulder, especially if you're right-handed, your image of the shoulder probably goes to the right shoulder, not the left shoulder. So memory is so related to activity and motion.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that I've heard people say about memory is that they think that a memory is held in the brain exactly as it was recorded, like it's a video recording.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a filed away on your hard drive, and you can just pull it up, and that picture is going to be exactly like it was when you took it and put it on your hard drive years ago. And that's not really the case either, is it?
Not at all. So and studies have shown this. You can, Google memory research and recollection and find that people don't remember the same thing at all. They're in the same place, the same time, and it could just be a few minutes or an hour later, and the recollection is different. So when we hearken back to early childhood, for example, when we come up with memories, oftentimes they're more like metaphors. So we have some sense of what took place, but how it actually took place may not be accurate. And then we have the complication of implicit memory, which is a felt sense of the memory. And some people actually make it more specific than that. They say birth to around 3 years old because the hippocampus is not developed enough until around 3 to imagine the future and to remember the past.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have a sense of what happened in our toddlerhood, but we don't know exactly, but we have sensations. And that's one of the ways the Feldenkrais method comes in.
Yeah.
So our work is so involved with sensation that we can recreate our self-image through movement, including implicit memories.
Yeah, and that's such a cool thing. So implicit memories are really interesting. So they're laid down early in childhood
Mm-hmm.
and before the hippocampus comes online.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're kind of they're not organized in time. So the hippocampus, when it comes online, it starts to, as I say, timestamp memories and puts them into categories. So we can like have a reference point for memory. And when we're having an implicit memory, it's not oriented in time. It
True.
feels like it's in the present. So you can
Yeah.
have a memory from childhood and from toddler years, and you can have a feeling that overwhelms you, whether positive or negative, that is rooted back in that time, but you don't know it. It feels like it's happening now. And that can have a profound impact on somebody's present state experience. Something triggered an old implicit memory, they're overwhelmed with sadness or something like that. That's going to taint how they perceive the world around them. They're going to filter it through that. So implicit memory is really interesting, and sorting out what is it, what is now, what was then. Like, how do you know?
Mm-hmm.
How do you sort that out?
Yeah, it's very challenging. And when people talk about being in the present moment, that's what they're hoping for, is to be in the present, responding to the situation at hand and not coloring it with, remnants of the past that distort the present moment. So we're all working within ourselves to be present and to be responsive instead of reactive from past events. Now, another aspect of all of this that complicates memory is that the state that you're in right now is going to create a different memory of the past. So if you're in a depressed state, for example, and you remember your childhood, it's going to look dark. If you're in a really happy mood and it's sunny and you're active and you're having a great time, you're much more likely to remember the good moments of your childhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So state, I can't emphasize that enough, is the state that we're in creates the memory experience that we're having. So we want to, do whatever we can to be in a neutral state at least, if not an optimistic state or vital state or a contemplative state, but states that give us the ability to recall and create our experience from the point of view of, enjoyable sensations and perceptions.
Yeah. So like, if we went on a vacation and so we went to Paris, went to the Eiffel Tower and saw some restaurants, went to some museums and experienced the culture, and you say, hey, Al, remember that trip we took? And I'm like in a really bad mood. I'm not feeling well, and I'm really cranky and grumpy. And I recall that, yeah, I remember that waiter. He was really rude, and I got so tired looking at all those paintings, and it rained. I hate rain. Another day you ask me, and I'm feeling really good, top of the world. and you say, hey, remember that trip we took and we saw the Eiffel Tower? Oh, yeah, it was amazing. The way it lit up at night, it was just absolutely gorgeous. We saw that outside cafe and we had some coffee and everybody was so polite and cool to us, you know. It can make a difference. The state you're in can totally change how you remember something, how you experience it.
And that's a wonderful example because vacations are supposed to be fun. They're supposed to be fun, but they're never smooth. I've never had a smooth vacation. There's always something that happens that, trips it up. Your luggage doesn't arrive when you arrive at your hotel, or your friend twists their ankle, or like you said, you run into a rude waiter, or you get bumped out of your seat at the airport. I mean, there's just so many things that can go wrong. Or your food is bad, or you get food poisoning. I mean, there's just so much that can go wrong on a vacation.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to have happy memories about the vacation. So we can train ourselves to bring the happy moments in the foreground.
Yeah.
And in fact, if we don't do that to a certain extent, you might never take a vacation.
Right.
Well,
there's another funny example. I mean, you've been married for a while and you're also married, do marriage and family therapy. And I know I've encountered this with my wife. We'll be remembering something and, she'll remember it in one way. It's like, oh, that was a really great experience. But I'll remember it another way. Like, yeah, I don't remember that. I remember all these other things that happened. It's like we encode different things, not only in the way we remember it, but at the time when we're experiencing that event. So whatever emotions we're having or psychological state we're in, that's going to bias it when we put it into memory too.
Yeah, because what we pay attention to is different.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we're walking down the street, you may be noticing the flowers and I'm noticing the clouds, or I'm more interested in trees than flowers. Maybe your gaze is down low and mine is up high.
Mm-hmm.
So we're walking down the same path, but we're seeing completely different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we have different memories about the same thing.
Yeah. So when we know this, I think it helps us. I think it helps us avoid conflict. So if you have a longtime partner, for example, and you're remembering as we're doing, talking about your wife, if you understand how memory works, you can just go, oh, that's interesting. Well, I love your perspective, and this is my perspective. And you don't have to try to convince each other who's right or wrong,
Save
You
a lot
just
of marital conflict that way.
There's a ton of marital conflict that way. Yeah. And vacations are one of the easier things to approach, kind of. Although they're not necessarily. People have a lot of conflict about planning. Who does the planning for the vacation?
Mm-hmm.
But if you talk about sex, money, and kids, those topics are even, they're much hotter potatoes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how do we navigate the world of memory? How do we do that?
I'd like to circle back to something that you mentioned earlier. You mentioned Feldenkrais lessons and doing lessons to help us process or clarify some implicit memories that we had from our development. It's like when we're learning to walk and sit up and crawl and reach for things and relate to our caregivers, that all happens in the early phases of development, and that's all implicit memory.
Yeah.
That's where and when our self-image is starting to form in those early developmental years.
Mm-hmm.
It's all implicit. And I would argue, I would think, you may have a different perspective on this, that those implicit memories from early development remain pretty much implicit.
Mm-hmm.
And that we don't really get the chance to process them and code them into explicit memories. And so by doing Feldenkrais lessons, we're working with those implicit memories and we're creating new or more vivid implicit memories that help to fill out the self-image even more. Unless, you're like a Feldenkrais practitioner or a trainer, where you can do Feldenkrais lessons. You can track the whole thing and put it into your memory recall to teach it later.
Mm-hmm.
But most people are going to do a Feldenkrais lesson. They're not going to remember it. It's not going to go into their stored memory. They're going to
Mm-hmm.
remember that they did it. They're going to remember they had a really cool experience doing it, but they're not going to remember point A through to the end.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was a really interesting point that you made. I wonder if you could talk more about that, working with implicit memory like that through movement and the
Yeah.
Feldenkrais method.
So what comes to my mind is at the beginning of training programs, we usually do a series of infant movements. And somewhere around the first few days or week, we actually visit the sucking movements. And nobody really remembers breastfeeding or bottle feeding. I don't think so. Some people claim to, but I think it's an implicit memory, or it's stories that they've heard, more likely, about that. But people lie on the floor, adults, and they're making movements of sucking. And Feldenkrais taught this lesson. And over the course of the years, I've developed it based on my experience of breastfeeding and even observing my daughter-in-laws breastfeeding my grandchildren and doing the lesson over and over myself. And I have created a really fond memory of my mother related to breastfeeding. Now, I can't have that. I know it's not real, but I do know my mother breastfed me more than a year, she and my sister both, because she told us, and I did that with my sons too. I felt it was important. So now when I think about breastfeeding, I remember that my mother did that, and I feel really grateful to her that she did that. It was probably good for me. And I did that with my kids, and I think it was good for them. And I see my daughter-in-laws doing a combination actually of breastfeeding and pumping and bottle feeding, but they're breastfeeding too. So we know that it helps create the bonding between the infant and the mother. We know it creates a secure attachment sense, of self. And so I feel gratitude toward my mom that she created that sense consistently with me during my infancy. So I'm kind of making up a story, but the story works because it makes me feel good. And I can not only think it, I sense it through the movements of exploration, of moving my mouth and my tongue and imagining it. And in the lesson, we swallow, we pause, we feel the rooting response, searching for the nipple. So through movement, all of those sensations are enhanced in a very pleasurable way. But I have to say, occasionally in trainings, there'll be a few people who feel kind of disturbed about it. And so we talk about that and go back to the lesson and go back and forth until they're able to have a sense of pleasure in the exploration of movement. So I'm not sure, what's happening with them. It's not for me to try to figure out, actually. People simply need to be listened to and supported so that they move from one emotional state to another emotional state to further integrate their experience.
Yeah, yeah. We also explore like crawling movements and like lifting the head on the stomach. These early things that we do as babies as well. And we're revivifying that. We're reactivating the neurology with that as adults. We're working with those implicit memories, right? Through that process of awareness through movement. That changes us in the present. Because those things we did, in our infancy, in our child and babyhood, I guess we'll call it babyhood. Is that a word?
Sure.
In our babyhood, we're learning to crawl and sit up. And we do those things now as adults. We tap into those early memories and all the stuff, the habits that were built on top of that, I think, improve. They get refined in some way. And it completes our self-image in a fundamental, foundational way, because that's where those implicit memories were built, laid down, those early movements that we learned to do.
Yes, and revisiting those infant developmental experiences creates a solid sense of a current self-image that's confident and secure. And that's a hard thing to convey, I believe. Unless you've done the Feldenkrais movements, I think that's a hard thing to convey to people. Al, do
Yeah.
you
Well,
think
I
so
think
too?
didactically, we just did it fairly well
Yeah, good.
in this podcast.
Good. Well, audience, I hope that you're understanding. And if you'd like to know more about that, there are lessons of lifting the head on the belly, and Al's got a bunch of them, and I'm sure I have some on my website too. But
Yeah.
how we carry our head makes all the difference in the world. So even right now, no matter where you are, do you have a sense of where the back of your head is? People don't often think about the back of their head,
That is such a tricky question. I've
isn't it?
taught quite a few lessons asking people, where's the back of your head? And I ask them to turn the back of their head to the right.
Mm-hmm.
And they go into a state of confusion initially.
Mm-hmm.
And so we
And
work to help them orient to where the back of their head actually is in space. And
mm-hmm.
it's a really interesting process to make that discovery.
Yeah, no matter where you are right now, if you have hands free, take your hand and touch the back of your head and see what you touch. Now, notice, are you touching the back of your skull, or are you touching closer to your neck? Or are you touching higher up, closer to the crown of your head? So people often, they have to find where the back of their head is located. Now, if you're lying on the floor, you can sense your head resting on the floor, and you can roll your head a little right and left, and that helps you find it. Or even standing or sitting, if you have a hand behind your head and you move your head, like you said, looking to the right and to the left, you can sense how the back of your head is moving in space because your hand is there. And then when you take your hand away and you turn your head a little bit, notice how the back of your head is now part of your self-image after touching it and imagining your head turning. And notice your breathing and sense how you're organized now. So we use that word organization, but how long does your spine feel? Where's your head located? Did the weight of your head change? You may not have noticed before that it was heavier, but maybe it feels lighter, or maybe you just know where it is now at the top of your spine. So these small inklings of awareness go a long way. They go a long way. They create security, confidence, and balance.
I now have more of a three-dimensional head.
In this moment, from
This
just
moment,
a
from that
short.
very brief exploration,
hmm
my head feels much more three-dimensional.
hmm And how does that affect you?
It gives me a different sense of the space around me. Like I
hmm
have a three-dimensional sense of my head in space
hmm
and have a different space around me. So I have a sense of the space behind my head as well as in front. So, typically we're so frontally oriented with the face, all the senses are moving forward primarily.
hmm
And so we tend to be more functioning in this frontal plane and forward and not backwards. So now, in this moment, from this brief exploration, I have the sense of sides and back and the space around me, all around.
hmm Yeah, and it creates, I think, I said before, security. It's like when you have that three-dimensionality, you know where you are located in space, and
Yes.
it assists our balance. So if you know where your teleceptors are located, your eyes, your ears, your nose, smelling, your mouth tasting, and you include the back of your head, the sides of your head, of course, the ears are on the sides, all of a sudden, if you tilt a little bit to the right and to the left, you're more aware of that movement in space. And
Mhm.
that helps you come back to the upright, position. So part of not falling is being able to catch yourself in a fall. I've
Totally.
done that. I'm sure we all do that. It's like you start to topple and whoop, you got to bring your head back to the center.
I have a wonderful story a client of mine shared with me a few weeks ago. She got up out of bed and she had a sudden bout of dizziness. And instead of just falling, she just spiraled down to the floor.
Mm-hmm.
We practice these things in class,
Mm.
spiraling up to sit, spiraling up to stand. And so that kicked in automatically. And she very gently spiraled down to the floor and was very safe in doing that. She didn't hurt herself.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So that's an example of an implicit memory kicking in, right?
Yes, and when people have practiced that particular Feldenkrais lesson of spiraling down and spiraling up, in a fall, it happens automatically. We spiral down and we're safe. So the way that we make contact with the floor really matters. Another one is tucking and rolling. So that's also implicit because when you're in the fall, you don't have time to think most of the time. You don't have time to think. So if you've done a Feldenkrais lessons of rolling and rolling forward or rolling slightly to the side, like a judo roll, whatever it is, frequently, if we trip and fall, we tuck. And that prevents breaking wrists and arms. It protects the head from making contact with the floor. So there are lots of strategies in falling that really work, or falling with the whole self, making more full contact. I have a step in my living room. It's very silly architecturally. I never would have put that in there, but it's too hard to take out. And one evening I was getting ready to leave the house and all the lights were off, and I missed the step. And I just did a belly dive. I just, spread out and landed on my stomach. And I was so shocked. But I went, wow, I'm fine. I just stood up, brushed myself off, and continued on my way. It made me laugh. And I was also grateful that I just spread out and fell as I did with my whole self. But doing Feldenkrais lessons, you pay it forward. You pay it forward.
Definitely pay it forward. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is implicit memory. I think that's a good example that's not frequently used with implicit memory.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Training a response. And training our responses, that is so liberating because we can train our responses in emotional situations and relational situations and movement as we're describing. We have a lot of choice, and that is freedom.
Yeah, it is. That is freedom. And that's what the Feldenkrais method helps us have, freedom and choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're not at the mercy of our past. We can recreate the past through associations and experiences. We can change the memory of the past. And we also know that sometimes it's referred to as reframing the past. That gives us strength and confidence too. So, for example, people who have alcoholic parents or an alcoholic parent, when focusing on the difficulties of the family, and so many people have alcoholism in their family, but when we focus on the disasters, then we can feel pretty bad about it. But studies have actually shown that kids that are raised in families where they're not taken care of as well as they could be, or they have an alcoholic parent, that they can be very vigilant and observing, and they learn very, very young how to take care of themselves. So some people say, well, they have to grow up too fast. Well, let's just not judge any of it. Let's just look at what people do. So when people are resilient, they choose behaviors that will get them dressed and off to school if a parent's not helping them. They do their homework on their own, or they go out and play when somebody's been drinking too much and they're in the house creating havoc. They go outside. It's like, so they're adaptable, and there's a strength in that adaptability and that ability to observe other people and to make good decisions for themselves at a very young age. So strength comes from difficulty.
It certainly can. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And it's not denial, just to be clear. It's not saying I'm going to look at the world with rose-colored glasses and not admit that I had difficulty in my childhood, or my, family of origin had these addictions or whatever they had. If we can acknowledge those things, and then we can feel good about ourselves. for having done well in life.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, people who go through those experiences, they do develop skill sets. And some of them are able to turn those into skills that serve them in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not everybody, but many people do.
Yeah. Well, and people need assistance.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like to believe that most people can heal the difficulties and challenges of their childhood with assistance and acknowledge their skills and their strengths and be better than their parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
And
know.
the Feldenkrais method is definitely can be a part of that for people. People pursue that because it does help to loosen up those well-formed habits, early formed habits, implicit memories that were laid down, and create opportunities for learning and improvement, getting new perspective on things, and recoding that early neurology.
Yeah.
So it's very cool. It's been a very cool discussion. I love this.
Yeah, and there's a lot more, but maybe we can continue at our next meeting, talking about more aspects of memory and how the brain works and how we use memory to manage our lives, because we're well informed. Yeah, right.
And how we can use the role of memory in terms of our personal narratives, how we tell stories, and those stories shape our lives.
Yeah, let's do that.
I'm excited about that.
Me too. See you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye now.
If you'd like to follow up with a question, send an email to info@feldenkreisforlife.com. We would love to hear from you.
You can learn more about us on our websites.
You can find Al at achievingexcellence.com.
You can visit my site to join my classes and reach out to me for private lessons online or at my Longmont studio. You'll find my store, the Feldenkrais store, there as well. We can purchase books, audio products, and videos. Donna's website is donnaray.com.
And if you visit my website, you'll find that I'm offering individual sessions, group classes in the Feldenkrais method, mentoring groups, professional Feldenkrais training program information, and recorded lessons.
Thank you again so much for joining us. I look forward to you hearing us next week.
Bye now.
Bye.